welcome to Paperback Flicks.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another Paperback Flicks. I am Ruth Craddock and I'm here with,
Ray Davidson?
and we are talking about The Great Gatsby, S. Scott Fitzgerald's great American classic novel. Ray, this is your first time reading The Great Gatsby?
Yes, first anything Great Gatsby.
Oh, okay, that's right, because you hadn't seen the movie or, okay. So your thoughts on the book?
My thoughts on the book was that it was better written than I anticipated. Um, just based on what people had like kind of explained about it. Like when I'm like, oh, I've never read it before, but we're going to be doing it for the podcast. And people say, oh yeah, it's blah, blah, blah. And they'd kind of explain it a little bit. And I was like, this feels trite. But actually, like I cared about the characters. In the beginning, I was like, a bunch of overindulgent, selfish people. Yay. And as you go through the story, like I actually cared. I actually kind of felt for them. Was this one of your favorites or just one that you
It is one of my most favorite books. I worship this book. Anyways, I'm a big fan. So I've always been into the 20s, and it might partially be because of Great Gatsby that I'm obsessed, but I had a roaring 20s wedding.
Mhm.
And yeah, I had flapper girl bridesmaids and my dress. I designed my dress. My mom made it for me. So I had like 3 layers, and then like the bottom layer came off and turned into like a flapper dress with these pearls that were at the bottom that like shook around anyways. So it was cool. It was fun. But I've always liked 1920s styles, 1920s cars. I like the whole aesthetics and the whole crazy fun, lively jazz music, and like
Mhm.
a lot of those things that appeal to me. Not the drunkenness and the prohibition, but the rest of it
Yeah.
appeals to me.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So yeah, I was always a fan. Like I'm a huge fan of like mobster movies, which is funny. I always say that, and I've never seen The Godfathers. I don't know how.
it's a
I've
different
seen
kind of monster movie.
right. I've seen like 100,000 movies. I have no idea. But I've seen so many mobster movies. I love like I want a car with like a Citron with like suicide doors. You
Yep.
know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm so into it. And yet somehow I never saw it. But I never saw this either or read the book. So apparently there's like as much as I love the genre, apparently I'm missing a whole section of
It's it's a
it.
wide genre though. There's a lot out there. So we're talking mobster, crime, prohibition stuff. There's a
Yeah.
lot. It's a but that's because it was an interesting era. A lot of crazy things happened because of this decision to, ban alcohol.
Yeah.
Like it caused like this huge ripple effect. A whole
Mhm.
lot of crazy things happened. And in a lot of ways it created more problems than it tried to fix. A whole
Right.
lot.
It does kind of speak to, I feel like Gatsby, The Great Gatsby also kind of speaks this a little bit that you can't legislate morality,
Yeah.
that the more law you try to put into how you think people should be a good person, the more off the rails they go in the other direction almost.
Yeah. Like there needs to be regulation about these things, but like just telling people straight up no
Mhm.
isn't gonna work great because people are crazy. And there's always be those people that more you tell them no, the more they're like, well, I'm gonna do it anyways.
Right.
And then it turned into this whole huge crime thing and all these people died. And like we have well, that's one thing that's positive from prohibition. We got the cars radio from it because
Yeah.
cops had to be able to communicate because they were trying to chase down the bootleggers, so they invented the car radio.
Yeah.
So they could that's where it started from. So I'm like, that's one good thing that came from prohibition. And beautiful cars. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the like on the other side, a lot of the people that became the millionaires and became the like American Robin Hoods and whatever
Hmm.
would not have been important were it not for prohibition. Like if prohibition had not been a thing, then nobody would have cared about Gatsby. Nobody would have cared about really any of the gangsters. Like all of the gangsters, a lot of the power that they had, a lot of that came from rum running and like
Yeah,
we kind of talk about like cartels now. That was not really a thing at the time, but this was the
not as much. Yeah. Well, so what's interesting about it is that I see Gatsby. the story is kind of like the American Dream, but in a very skewed way.
Hmm.
Like, so when you look at it from Gatsby's perspective, he's just trying to make his fortune. He's trying to make good. He's trying to keep going upward and onward. And this is how he found a way to do it. This is how
Yeah.
he was going to get there. This is how he was going to get what he wanted. He tried to do it other ways, but it didn't work out that way.
Yeah.
And so, like, when you look at it at the perspective of, if you're trying to achieve the American dream, he's trying to get this like goal, like you can kind of respect and understand all the stuff he's done and all the hard work he's put into this, especially when you start understanding that his whole lifestyle, a lot of it has to do with Daisy. If it weren't about her, I think his life would be a bit different, besides the whole fact of how it ends. He had high ambitions to start with. Like he wanted to be more, he wanted to be somebody. So he pushed himself to become something. But I think Daisy kind of pushed it across like the edge from like a goal and an ambition to an obsession,
Right.
where like he had to have these things because then he could have her. And
Right.
like the whole thing became one big package together. So he could
Right.
separate it.
Well, and he like it talks about I kind of like that you don't really get who he is and who he says he is when he's like, "Oh, yes, well, I'm an Oxford man because all of they're all educated at Oxford." And he kind of throws it away.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like you kind of get the hint of like what's going on. And also, they don't tell you straight up in the book like he was a rum runner, he's a mobster. He like they let you
Let you
figure it out.
imagine how involved he was. Yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of like that because that's not what was important to him.
No.
Like when he was, what was his name? Gantz,
Yeah. When he
whatever.
was James Gatz.
Yeah. And like it talks about how once you start to actually know who he is, how when he was like he like they say something like he'd been with tons of women and he didn't care for virgins because they were all like innocent and ignorant. And then he didn't care for experienced women because they just kind of threw it all away. Like, and so women were not important to him. And then he met Daisy, and Daisy changed him.
Yeah.
Daisy became worth living for. He was already on this upward trajectory, more or less, because, going to Oxford and whatever, like, these kind of things
Yeah.
can set you up.
The billionaire on the boat, the yacht,
Yeah.
and Cody.
Yeah. Like that already, like that gave him the experience and could have given him the money, except the
He
family
it
contested the
didn't
money.
work out. So
Yeah. But like all of that gave him experience. It gave him like this ability to move forward, going into the army, like that all helped him in and of himself. And then Daisy was this thing outside of him to live for.
yeah.
And that's when it was like, suddenly it was worth it. Suddenly it was worth living that lifestyle because it got to her.
It's very interesting when like you understand his story, like what he's gone through and what he's done. It's hard, at least for me, not to identify with him and not to sympathize with his situation. Like, for those of us who have grown up poor or not so well off, it's kind of a constant ambition, a constant drive to want to prove that you can do more and to want to like do better than your parents did or want to be more educated or like there's this a sense that you have to keep pushing farther and to do better than the people before you. And I think that's kind of the same with parents too. They want to see their kids succeed more. And like I think that's true for everybody, but I think it's true more for people who are not well off and
Yeah.
have had to deal with, not having food or not being able to pay rent or have electricity, or any moment the house could go in foreclosure and they get locked out of their home. I respect that ambition. But like at the same time, I don't know that I would have gone. No, I know I wouldn't have gone the same route. But
Right.
I can understand though, like it's very I think it shows how sort of intoxicating and like alluring the concept of getting into mob or crime, becoming a bootlegger, becoming part of the drug cartel could be
Yeah.
because it's a way for somebody who comes from nothing to get up to the top. It's
Yeah.
a way to build something.
Right. Well, and also he had what, dirt farmer parents? Like they spent all of their time toiling, and you get the sense that he didn't really have like a value system, and so value became net worth, kind of a mentality,
Yeah.
to where like it's like I can think of several different people who are like well, myself. So I was super into, I love doing stage work. I love doing cinematography. I loved doing video journalism. Like I was like, this is it. Like I was ready to like go to Chapman University because I was on this kind of a similar, I was on this upward trajectory in this direction.
Mhm.
And then my parents, like you said, started out ridiculously poor. Like when people like make jokes, we were so poor. We only had, one TV in the house. I was like, you had a TV. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, all of your walls existed in your house. Our wall burned down. Like, like
Yeah.
it was rough. Looking back at it, I can see how someone else in that position would, like you said, like just be like, I need that. My parents chose kind of a more like religious conservative upbringing for their kids, which meant we struggled because my dad wasn't willing to do the underhanded stuff or whatever it was. And then I kind of did the same thing where I was like, I had the opportunity to maybe do this. It would mean tons of debt. It would mean I might not make it. It would mean I might have to give up on my morals, my value system, whatever,
Hmm.
potentially. Or I could marry and stay home and whatever. And I understand some people can do it all. Great. I think that's awesome. For
That's a
me,
if you
I
can.
made the choice of family and home life and not pushing my boundaries that direction and instead pushing my boundaries this direction.
Yeah.
And now here I am 40 and I'm like, I do a podcast. And that's fine. Like I'm very happy. We live far better than my parents. Well, my parents live well now.
Yeah.
But like
That's time.
when I was growing up, people like how I live now were rich. As far
Hmm.
as I was concerned, these people that I am were rich people.
Yeah.
You know, the Jay Gatsby's of the world, like were unfathomable. Like they might as well be royalty,
Yeah. Mhm.
because they're just so far beyond me that I just didn't get it. They're all pretend, you know. So I do get that, like, but for my
More
choice,
qualms and
yeah, yeah.
values.
But for my choice to live the religious lifestyle that my parents had endeared in me,
Hmm.
but Jay or James, like he didn't have that necessarily, and
Yes.
so value was what you were worth
Like
in dollars
what
and
you
cents.
can earn. That's a hard mentality to get away from, you
Mhm.
know? I think, but it's because of, what my own traumas from my childhood, my own issues that I gained. And I think I can relate to that when it comes to Gatsby because he came from something far worse, much, much poorer than my situation. And like he saw just the nothingness and the desperation and just how just nothing they had. And he needed more. He couldn't live that way. So then like and because he didn't have like any particular values really like instilled in him, he was like, I will do what it takes to make it happen. And so he did. And I think what's interesting about you're talking about how they don't come out and say who he is, and you're kind of not sure who he is as you're going along. I love that because it's like, because Gatsby, in a way, is not himself, but is himself. Gatsby is who he's decided to be.
Right.
And like who he was is someone else, and who he wants to be is another person. And so, like, he's has a duality because he is the poor boy that's ambitious and wants to move ahead. At the same time, he is this gentleman who was Oxford man, and he's on the up and up, and upper echelon, fancy man. Like he's classy. He's cultured. You know what I mean? And so like he's both because it took a lot of work for him to learn to behave a certain way, to learn his manners, to control his temper, to learn how to talk and act like a sophisticated upper class person. And, he learned to play the part. And
Yeah.
that takes time and work, especially when you didn't come from it.
Well, and it wasn't made up out of whole cloth. He does travel the world. He, like you said, he does learn to present himself gentlemanly. He did serve in the army, and he
Mhm.
did go to Oxford because he served in the army. Like it wasn't like he was just straight up lying.
Yeah.
He was creating a romanticized version of his actual reality.
Yeah. So that's probably part of why he was able to maintain this reality for so long, is it was somewhat based in actual reality. It
Right.
was based in some truth. And the best lies are, they have some truth in them. And
Hmm.
what I love though is that we see this whole story from Nick Carraway's perspective. And what I
Hmm.
like about Nick is he is, high class, but he's not high class. He's
Right.
kind of in the middle ground of like well-to-do people. They come
Yeah.
from a family of money, but not like that much money. Like he's well-to-do, but like he's not, you know what I mean? Like he's still
Yeah.
sort of he's living in New York and doing the bonds thing with the money his dad gave him. But
Right.
it's not like he has all this money to do whatever the heck he wants with, you know?
Right. He's out there. I mean, he's living in what was it, like a groundskeeper's cottage.
At the old
And
groundskeeper cottage. Yeah.
yeah, and he's busting it on his own. Like he's making his own way in life. I do like, so I tend to like grab a line or two that are like, I love it because this is a little bit Romeo and Juliet. It's different, but it is. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I can see that. Yeah.
But and my favorite line in Romeo and Juliet is at the very end, and I may not quote it exactly right, but it's never was there a tale of more woe than that of Juliet and her Romeo.
Yeah.
And I saw a lot of that in this, but in this, my favorite line is also towards the end when Nick is talking about Daisy and what's the husband's name?
Um, Tom Buchanan.
Tom. Yeah, and he says they just break things. They
They're
break things, they ruin people, and then they just walk away.
reckless,
And
careless people.
yeah, and that's also reflected in their upbringing that they always just had. They just had an abundance. I don't remember. So I wore the pearl necklace in reference to the necklace that Tom
Oh
had
yeah.
given her.
That was like worth $100,000 or something
Yeah,
crazy.
like just insanely wealthy, right? And then
Mhm.
she just throws it away because she can. Like I look at that and I'm like, you could buy a house
You
today
could sell
for that
that
money.
and
Like,
go like live on your own. Take that
yeah, like I
necklace I gave you and sell it. Move out.
well, and if she was so torn up about Gatsby not being able to come home and he couldn't come home because of a little bit having to do with
Him
red tape,
trying to like,
but also means. He didn't have means.
yeah. Because there was
She
a real
just
sense of like back in the day that you didn't get married until you had enough money to establish a decent home. So
right.
that there was really like, you didn't like just get married when you fell in love with somebody and then try to make it work. And you didn't live with your parents really, but they were raised that you don't get married until you have enough money to provide for a
Yeah.
wife, to like provide a decent home. And I can see that mentality. That makes sense. But like, but with that in mind, and because in his mind, and like he says in the book, he felt married to her. He
Right.
felt like he needed to give her the life she deserved, and she was used to a certain kind of life. And so he was
Yeah.
doing what he could to make it happen. But sadly, though he thought of himself as married to her, apparently she didn't. Though she
Right.
loved him, she's also very finicky. They apparently were only together for like a month or so
Right.
before he left for the war. And like, so like they had this whirlwind romance, but at the same time, obviously it meant something to both of them because it clearly left a mark that
Right.
she's still quite aware of him even after all this time.
Yeah. They're writing and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the letters and everything. And you can tell when she sees him again that she's just like, whoa,
Yeah.
like it profound for her too. So I don't doubt that she loved him and that she cared about him.
Mhm.
But the problem is she's one of these people. So let's talk about the whole class thing. I'm very interested in class stories. I don't know if you noticed about me, but I like seeing how the different people are raised and how that changes your ambitions and your values and just the different world it opens up. from like when you're poor to when you're middle class to when you're like crazy rich. It's a different universe. And it's just so fascinating to me. But like with this, what's interesting is you have Gatsby, you have that kind of a person. You also have I forgot her name all of a sudden. Wilson,
Hmm.
um, Myrtle and her husband, the fairly dirt poor people, you know, and that you have some representatives of the lower class, and then you have Nick, who's kind of in the middle, kind of hovering, and then you have the Daisies and the Toms and
Jordan.
their crazy astronomical amount of wealth that they can just pick up to a new town and get a new house all the time. Daisy grew up with a certain amount of wealth. Obviously, Tom's family was more wealthy than hers, but like she was used to a certain lifestyle. And like even her mom's like, "Oh, you can like hang out with all these officers because they're from wealthy families." Like
Mhm.
not knowing that some of them weren't. Like some of them were from prestigious families, blah blah blah. Like if she had known that Gatsby wasn't, would she kicked him out? Probably. Mom would have been like, "Okay, you can't be here. Get out of here." To an extent, I can't blame her for the bad choices that she made to an extent. Um, because she was taught rather poorly how to handle things, how to deal with things.
Hmm.
And it's not entirely her fault, but at the same time, at some point, you have to acknowledge where you were misled as a child, like what you learned growing up, what was good and what was bad, and you have to take responsibility for those things. And then
Right.
you need to grow up from there. So
Right.
yeah, I can like complain all day about my childhood not being great and the emotional traumas and the emotional abuse and things I dealt with, but that was the past. At some point, I have to take what I was given, what I learned growing up, and decide, am I gonna just be angry and bitter, or am I going to change? Am I going to say, hey, I'm not gonna do this anymore? I'm not gonna continue the cycle. So I get that she's partially not to blame for her stupidity.
When people were telling me about like not people, a person was kind of going over like what the basic of the book was, like I said, like my takeaway from her description was a bunch of people who are just so rich that they don't understand the value of anything and therefore nothing has value. They just throw it all away and they don't care and they live such horrible lives because they live meaningless lives. Like that's what it sounded like. They
Yeah.
sounded like a series of people that live meaningless lives. And I was like, what an awful story. How is this a classic? How does she love this book? Like,
Yeah. So like that's a part of the story. And that's what I thought was so interesting about like you have the Toms of the world that are like the only people that are worth anything are the people that were born into money, that were raised, the aristocratic, that like have these extinguished families, and generations of wealth. But like to him, the Gatsbys of the world, who actually worked for their wealth, who actually busted their butt, used their intellect, used their cunning to come up with schemes and ideas, and like clearly he was good at whatever it was he did. You know that he was able to save up enough money in 3 years to buy this giant crazy house across from Daisy,
mhm,
quite literally across from her. So
right.
that just shows how much like thought and effort he put into this whole plan, to this whole dream of his, that he busted his butt. So in a lot of ways, he deserves Daisy and everything 100 times more than Tom. But in Tom's eyes, it doesn't matter how
Yeah.
hard somebody works or how smart they are or what they've done to improve or better themselves. They're worthless based off of who they were born to, what they
Yeah.
were born as.
Well, and so I grew up with the term. The term was nouveau riche, right? The newly rich, new money.
Yeah.
And like I heard it, I would hear people all the time because it's very weird, like my upbringing. Like my grandmothers were both raised, they're members of the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. Okay.
Mhm.
They went to like debutante,
Okay. So,
whatever, cotillion. Like
yeah.
I grew up with a little bit of that. And yet my parents were dirt poor and like none of my grandparents, I never looked at them and I was like, oh, they're the upper crust. Like I knew they weren't, but there was still kind of that concept even among them because they had grown up in the world of debutantes.
Hmm.
There was this concept of the nouveau riche were the pretenders.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the phrase, like when people are like, what, my money's not good enough for you? Yes,
Yes.
that
Because
is a thing. People with old money do not think your money is as good as theirs. Like maybe not now, but
they resent new
I
money. They're like, how
I
dare you buy your way into my world?
yeah, like I grew up understanding I was a serf compared to them. I didn't matter compared to them. However, I also understood that there was that little bit of, oh, well, you know, yes, yes, a lovely home for the nouveau riche. You know, like that was like a thing that I heard all of my childhood. And so I saw that in Tom. Like he's like he made his money, you know.
Ew. He
It
has
also,
living. It's like those Regency novels they talk about. So what does your uncle do? He's a lawyer. He has a shop in town, like
mhm,
in Pride and Prejudice. And I'm like, yeah, he works for a living. What a horrible thing. I
yeah.
respect the crap out of somebody who can make their own business and be wealthy. That means you earned it. That means you're smart. Was
Right.
oh, he works for a living? Oh, like that's
So
gross. And it's
did
like,
you ever watch Downton Abbey?
I have not watched it, but someday I
Oh,
will.
Tom
Okay.
and Daisy reminded me of that. So there's a scene in Downton Abbey where one of the girls, one of the daughters of the like main like Downton Abbey people. Anyway, so she's getting married to like a businessman or some kind of, I don't know, one of these nouveau riche types, you know, and he's like looking at this giant house and he's like, oh, we'll have to, he's like, I'm going to buy you this giant, beautiful house and we can get beautiful furniture. Money is no object, you know, and she's like, your people buy furniture, my people inherit it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yep, there it is. There it is. Like, you know, but
Like
yeah, there that
fine
mentality, as much as I don't understand it because I haven't lived it. I do understand that it exists. I did grow up hearing it.
around it. Yeah. Yeah. And it's very interesting. It's just how different mentality is. And like what's funny also, then you have Tom like plucking Myrtle out of obscurity,
Mhm,
randomly be like, oh, this is my girl now. And like no problem whatsoever with the fact that he's literally taking another man's wife. He
mhm.
has an apartment for her in town, buys her all the stuff, all these fancy things. She's clearly not his class level. She's not his education level. She's not on par with his whole mentality. And yet he's with Myrtle.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and he's never going to marry her. Like I think it alludes I think it alludes to it in the book that she thinks he's going to leave her someday and take me. He never is. Never ever is
no,
Tom
that's
ever
not
going
what you
to.
are to him. Like,
She is his whore.
you
Like
are essentially, you're his escape. You're his
yeah.
where he can do whatever he wants and he doesn't have to live in that lifestyle. So it's funny because Tom himself doesn't like the lifestyle he lives in. For the
Hmm.
very sake, you can tell that from the fact that he is with Myrtle, that he slums with Myrtle to have and has this little tiny apartment with Myrtle, where he has this beautiful, amazing house and this huge property with Daisy. That
Right.
he has like the creme a la creme woman and like situation and everything, but he that's not enough for him.
Right.
That's confining or something. That it's like he just gets bored with it. So he wants to be, go and live in this tiny apartment with this, very crass, like low class lady and fight and argue and shout and get drunk and be obscene with him. You don't see him do these things with Daisy. You don't see him
Right.
get like crazy drunk with Daisy to do drugs with Daisy. You don't see him do any of these things
Hmm.
really, so clearly he doesn't have that kind of relationship with her.
Right.
So it's like either that's he's only that way when he's with Myrtle and he's not, or he's with other women and he's not that way with Daisy and she doesn't see that side of him,
Hmm.
or that's who he really is, but he's pretending to be this because he was raised to be that. He
Right.
was raised that he's better than everybody else because he's got this, but at the same time, he wants to be like everybody else and slum and just live the regular life, but he doesn't want to admit it.
What was it? Henry the Eighth? How Henry the Eighth is known for being like just he could never remain faithful to anyone at any time, you know.
Yeah.
And and a lot of times like his wife was at I mean he had six of them, but but it was always like it was the proper woman to marry and whatever. And then in his bed was anybody he wanted because sexy is sexy. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's kind of that mentality. And because they were just object. He broke her. He like he literally punches her and damages her. Like, but he just breaks her. He breaks their marriage and then he just walks away. And he's upset when she dies. She's upset when she's killed. And I think part of the upset is because of who it is. Like he thinks it's Gatsby. He figures out that it's Daisy. And
I don't know if he ever does. I don't know if he's ever told.
oh,
So that's the thing. I'm not sure if
maybe
anyone
this
he
is
ever finds out. I think it's just Nick that knows.
yeah, maybe you're right. I think that contributes to part of the reason that he's upset
Yeah.
because in the same way that like he's cheating with his wife since the beginning, apparently. He's cheating all the time
Yeah.
and he's cheating at least once with a married woman. So he knows that he's breaking up that marriage too.
It's a
And then
double
he's
whammy.
upset. Yeah, and then he's upset when it's someone taking from him because that's exactly it. Because you're playing with his toys. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's
Only
he
he
has
can play
no
that game.
regard. Yeah, he has no regard for human life. Like he has no regard for other people.
Their
Like
feelings or anything. They're
yeah,
not they're objects. They don't have value to him.
yeah,
And what's I don't know, what's funny about that is like he's such a massive hypocrite in so many ways.
yeah,
Like it's really hard to not hate Tom.
yeah,
It's easy to hate. Like they make him seem like just this pompous, like just this jerk, you know?
yeah.
And as far as we can tell, as far as we know, I don't think Daisy ever cheated on him. I think
Right,
once she got married, she was with him and she was dedicated, you know,
right,
this was her life. She chose this life and that was it.
right.
And
Gatsby was the first temptation. The like it
yeah,
appears that she has been this betrayed yet loyal wife.
yeah.
And
She's been
here's
trapped in this
Gatsby, and
marriage.
he's like, "Oh my gosh, I love you. Look at this. I've been living for you this whole time."
Yeah.
And that's gotta be like I love my husband and we have an excellent relationship. And if someone came out of the woodwork and was like, "Hey, for the last 20 years, I've only been thinking about you," I'd be like, "What?" Like, not that that
That's
would be like,
rather
"Cool, I'm going to
flattering.
you." But like, could you imagine if I had had a bad relationship this whole time and
Yeah.
Scott was just like with everyone? I think I would choose the person that loved me too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well, he's willing to go through all this effort to make her happy. He's gone through, and plus, he actually treats her well. Like, Gatsby actually likes Daisy as a person. He sees that there's sweetness and there's kindness and there's goodness in her, and that she has all the good qualities that he wants.
mhm,
That the good things are there. That she is a good person underneath all the money and all the pomp and circumstance. That she's not a bad person, but because of her upbringing, she makes bad choices and she
yeah.
is a bad person because
Okay. She's a weak person. That's what I see. I see her as a weak person.
her resolves are very wishy-washy. Her values are also wishy-washy. So it's
Hmm.
interesting to see um, people coming from a lower class situation with little value or real like belief structure, um, and the questionable choices they make, and then people from the upper class making the same type of choices, but from a different perspective. They're also without real value or morals. Like
Yeah,
there's sense. So it's like the whole thing, like when you can have whatever you want, why wouldn't you do whatever you want?
right.
You know, and like nothing's limited to you. So then nothing has value because you didn't have to work for it. You don't have to fight for it. And if he can just go pick up another woman whenever he wants and just like stash her away and like why would anything matter to him? It doesn't. But like part of me wonders if Tom did care about Myrtle to an extent. Like he did have a fondness for her and he did care about her
Yeah,
as much as he could. But like,
right.
yeah, he was never gonna leave his wife for her. Like he
No.
didn't want her to even say Daisy's name. He wanted to pretend like Daisy was a completely separate thing, the Myrtle, and Myrtle wasn't supposed to bring her up. That like
Hmm.
she's ruining his little vacation from his rich life when
Right.
she brings up his wife. Like she's like, don't even, and she's not even, why is she calling his house? Like, so yeah, that's the other thing. I love that that's how you're introduced to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like that Nick just comes over to see Daisy and Tom, and he's just there for a nice little, hey, I'm living in the area, let's hang out. And in the middle of dinner, their little nice little dinner, the four of them, his mistress calls in the middle of dinner,
Yeah.
and everybody knows about it. To where like Jordan's like, I thought everybody knew. And she's like, "Oh, he's got a woman," and blah blah blah. But then apparently, wasn't the first time. Apparently, this is why they left Chicago. This is
Right.
like why they move around. This has happened frequently throughout their marriage. And like in the book, it's 8 years. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the movies, it was like 5 years. So
Mm-hmm.
like it's a significant amount of time that she's been
Right.
going through this crappy relationship, and he's been this horrible, awful husband. So like this isn't new, but I don't know. Okay. I'm not the kind of person to have an affair or cheat or lie or steal or anything, but I'm always amazed when people, either fictional or in real life, don't have the common sense to hide it. You're having an affair. Why are you calling his house? Like that he'll come and see you, or like have some way where you can call him where nobody knows that it's you. Like,
Yeah.
how are you that indiscreet? And I see this in like things all the time where it's like they're not hiding the fact that they're doing these things. Like they expect they're not gonna get caught.
Right. Well, and there's a certain sense of shame that I feel like is kind of healthy. Like I said, Scott and I actually have an excellent relationship and it's never been an issue. I've never been like, is he seeing someone else? And also I've never been even tempted to like there's never been anyone that I'm like, oh, if only I hadn't married. Like never.
No.
And I love that we have that relationship, but that's a series of choices that we make, right?
Mhm.
And there's a certain amount of shame that I would feel if I married someone that I couldn't bring myself to love. There's a certain amount of shame that if I were if like I said, if he was like just so awful and clearly cheating on me and for whatever reason I didn't divorce that because
Well,
I am the person that would divorce that.
yeah.
But if for whatever reason I decided that that was just not something that I was going to to do, I would still have such a sense of shame about me stepping outside that I would never consider, like from Myrtle's perspective, I would never consider hurting that man, even if you didn't love him, even if you married him because
He,
it was something to do, because you were poor and some guy liked
he
you.
fooled you to think that he had more money than he did.
Yeah.
Really, you didn't
Like,
know him well enough, and you probably should have dated him longer.
right. Like, even if, like, there's a certain amount of shame
Yeah.
that either should cause you to not do it, or like to do it the right way, to leave one if you're going to another, but or if you're gonna be that person that steps out on your spouse, maybe don't do it so publicly and flagrantly and right in their wife's face or whatever. Like,
Know some discretion. I guess that's silly to say because they're already showing they don't have discretion and they don't
right,
have values. So who do they care who they hurt? But
right.
yeah.
It
So
just,
we are
it's
talking
so
about why don't they
lopsided.
get divorced? So first off, it's like in that time it was less of a
Yes,
thing, of course. But then
yes, I understand.
and then with Daisy, they said something about like being religious. Supposedly she's religious,
Oh,
and then that's why like she's a Catholic, she doesn't believe in getting divorced. And
oh,
somebody's like that's what Merle's sister said at one point and
oh, yeah.
out in the apartment.
Well, and then Nick says that was confusing because no, she's not, because he that's his cousin and he knows that she's not Catholic, at least. She might still be
She's
religious,
not
but
she's not practicing at least. Like he's
yeah, like he's like,
it's like
uh,
that's not how no. That that might just be what Tom's
yeah,
telling Myrtle. But
yeah,
at the same time, why isn't Myrtle willing to divorce Wilson?
right.
I think part of the problem is that she doesn't have her own income. And so she needs a sugar daddy like Tom. And
Hmm.
like according to the sister, Tom's her only sweetie she's ever had. So she's never stepped out on Wilson before.
Yeah.
But apparently she's always wanted to because the first chance she had, she just went for it. And that whole story about how they met on the bus, and I'm like, and like she just, I was like, oh, so it's the most amazing day of my life. And I'm like,
Right.
the flip is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Wrong with you?
Well, and I guess part of it is because neither of us have that mentality anyway. It's hard
Yeah.
for me to say, like, this doesn't make sense and this doesn't make sense. And why would you do that?
Yeah.
I don't have
I've
that
never cheated on
mentality.
anybody, so I don't understand the desire. I don't understand like if you're finding yourself your eye wandering, my mentality's always been just talk to them about it. Like I'm starting to find myself interested in other people. I think maybe we should break up or we should talk about this.
Counseling or
Something's wrong
something.
in our
Yeah.
relationship here that I'm looking elsewhere, that I'm even tempted.
Yeah. Well, and I know that it can be a thing. Like I mentioned in the beginning, Jay Gatsby is kind of the romanticized version of his past experience.
Hmm.
Sometimes that happens with relationships too. Like if you just like, because I know I would have a crush on a guy and I would never talk to him, and he just became amazing. He was just the be all and end all of whatever, you know? And I almost didn't want to ever talk to him because I didn't want him to be a real person that had opinions that weren't exactly what I
You didn't want him
assumed
to
his.
break the illusion.
Yeah. And I feel like that happens in relationships, and this is the perfect example. Myrtle can be whatever Tom wants her to be, and then he goes back home to real life, and it was all make believe for him anyway. And Myrtle can have that like fun and fabulous man that has everything and get me a doggy for the apartment type of a lifestyle.
Hmm.
And she knows, I think part of Myrtle knows that she's never actually going to have that. She's never going to be the new Daisy. And so take what you can get while you can get it is kind of an underlying theme of their relationship.
And then
Anyway,
that whole situation where like he ends up hitting her, and it's like, okay, if he's hitting you, I don't care how much money this guy has or how fancy he makes you feel. If the dude's smacking you across the face, you're having that kind of volatile relationship. Clearly, this isn't a good thing.
right.
But I think the difference is that people value having money, having wealth to such an extent that like not having it feels like death. So
Hmm.
her going back to just being the filthy, dirty wife of the guy that owns the garage and living
Hmm.
over the garage in that soot valley is the most like just awful thing in the world to her, that she's willing to put up with this guy using her and abusing her and just making her feel awful
Yeah.
because at least he has money. At
Yeah.
least she gets to have this nice apartment. She gets to have nice things, these nice clothes. She values those things
Yeah.
over actual relationships.
And it does speak to the time again, like how divorce was not so much a thing like that.
Mhm.
It wasn't just like you cheated on me, I'm out because we both can do better than that. You know what I mean?
No.
Like that was not really a thing, like you
The
said. And
mentality that you once you got married, you just didn't get divorced. You had
right,
mistresses or whatever, but like,
right. Well,
and
and
that's
so and
acceptable to
so
some people.
so too was it not unheard of for a man to beat a woman. Like that's just how that goes. Like, you know, for decades after that too. Like us today, we go, don't stand for that. If he's cheating on you, get out. If
Yeah.
he's beating you, get out. And that's I think that's much healthier, or seek counseling or whatever it is. But
Hmm.
in the 20s,
But that like also shows like how far in like things have changed for women. Now that's the other thing, other underlining thing I kind of see in this book story is like the situation for the women in it is so horrible. It's all
mhm,
about what these men are willing to provide for them and what they're willing to give them because
mhm,
they can't live on their own. They don't have, well, Daisy has some money. Like it's not like she couldn't, she had money of her own, but she wouldn't have as much money if she left him. But like, would there be a shame or a stigma attached to
right.
that, you know,
Well,
leaving her
and
husband?
she has family money, and if you don't do right by family,
Yeah.
with
You don't want to embarrass the family. So it's
yeah,
all about, keeping up appearances. But yeah, at the same time, even her situation, she still feels trapped. And like
yeah,
she says that line about, when they told me that my daughter, the baby was a girl, I said, good. I hope she's a fool. 'Cause that's the best thing a woman can be in this world. It's a beautiful fool.
yep.
And that just speaks volumes about her disillusionment, her relationship, and everything that she's gone through in the past 8 years. And that's one of the things I really love about F. Scott Fitzgerald. He can do so much with so few words. So this is actually a really short book. It's not long. Like I
Right.
listened to the audiobook, which was wonderful, and it was like 4 hours. It was like nothing.
Yeah.
So it's
I
not
say
a long book.
I read it and I read it in less than a week. And that was with doing other things as well. So,
Yeah, so it's although it's like sophisticated in the way it's written, and there's like you have to pay attention to some of the wording.
mhm.
So it's not like it's an easy read, as in like it's simple, but
Right.
it's an easy read in the fact that it's fast. But he
Right.
also somehow he's able to put in personality, good dialogue, background, and like history into a
Mhm.
small amount of time. Like he's able to make all those things work in very few pages.
Yep.
And I love that. And then that's kind of the thing that every writer wants to be able to aspire to be able to like not just move the story forward and the action and the dialogue, but you like to give all this meaning behind what's being said and what's happening. And like that's one of the things I love about this book is that I feel like every character in this book is a fully developed character. There
Yeah.
are people. I don't feel like they're a stereotype per se. Even Myrtle, like she's kind of crass and like loud, but like I still feel like Myrtle's a person.
Right.
So like even I feel bad when Myrtle gets run over.
Yeah.
So she's not a really likable person. She's knowingly cheating on her husband with another married man, and she has horrible values. But at the same time, she doesn't deserve to get run over.
Correct.
You know, in her own weird way, she thinks she's doing the best she can. And
Hmm.
that's another thing. It feels like everybody's trying to do the best they can.
Yeah.
Like, and everybody feels trapped in the life they're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so one of the characters that we haven't mentioned, but she's also surprisingly well developed is Jordan. In the beginning, I'm like, Jordan kind of just feels like she's there to move the story along.
Just to be the friend.
Yeah, because Nick needs a girl by his side, so here's Jordan. And also, it means that, yeah, Daisy has that friend, so the connections can be made or whatever. But then
Hmm.
you start to notice that, like, I mean, that's how life is that there will be people that may not be integral to my story, and yet they are actually integral to their own story and to someone, to the person next to me's story, you know. But by the end of it, like Nick, like he talks about how, like, when he essentially had to break up with Jordan, you know,
Hmm.
after all that they had been through, after all they had witnessed and all that they had experienced, it was too much. And apparently he could never get over or he felt like he would not be able to get past that for whatever reason. And so he's breaking up with Jordan and he's just leaving it all behind him. And I forget exactly how it said, but it's something to the effect of like he was a little bit angry and at least half in love and just completely sad, but he had to let her go or leave her or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And kind of that concept that she too was like, I'm not prepared to fight for this, but if you're prepared to stay, I'm willing to try. And he was kind of like, I
Mm.
don't think I can try. And so
Like,
they, you know, but he was feeling something genuine for her.
yeah.
And she was sitting there like she never intended to be part of any of this. She had her own thing going on. She was all about golf or whatever. She didn't
Yeah,
mean to start caring for Nick.
she's a
Like,
golfer and she has her own life and she's, you know, and in a lot of ways, like they even say it in like the remake and in the book and stuff, you know, rich girls don't marry poor boys. And like she's kind of a rich girl too. She's
mhm.
kind of up there too. She's probably not as rich as Daisy and Tom,
She
but
grew
she's
up with Daisy, so.
definitely, yeah, so she's definitely seems like she's better off than
Mhm.
Nick, you know? So like yeah, I think one of the things I like about that relationship with Nick and Jordan is it feels like it just kind of naturally happens. Even though they
Mhm.
make the joke, we're gonna throw it together and like I'm gonna throw you into a broom closet and make you guys fall
Yeah,
in love or something. She's like, make this happen.
yeah.
Um, and I think that's funny, but like sometimes that does happen. That when you spend time with people and you
Mhm.
become connected to these people, you can't help but sort of get involved in a relationship with
Mhm.
their friends because you're now a part of this thing. They kind of became a thing, like their
Yeah,
own little circle. And so now he was drawn into it because Gatsby's his neighbor and Jordan's his cousin's friend and Jordan was at the party and then they have this in common now because anyways,
yeah.
so like it kind of just naturally kind of flowed. Yeah, there wasn't a ton of information about their relationship, but it kind of felt like it just kind of happened.
Yeah.
Like neither
Yeah.
one of them was planning on falling for each other or
Right.
feelings. They were just gonna maybe be like a summer flirtation. And
Yeah.
like it started to develop in something else.
Yeah. It kind of seems like when he has that line, when he's like, I'm leaving her, and he says something about being half in love or at least a little in love, or he says something like that, you know?
Hmm.
And um you almost get the sense that he's like, as he's leaving, he's realizing, oh wow, I was falling in love with you.
Like, yeah,
Too little too late, but oh, like you almost get that sense that he's like,
yeah,
oh, like
no crap. But
which can happen in life,
hmm,
so involved in the Daisy Gadsby Tom of it all that
yeah,
he didn't even
fully,
stop to
yeah,
assess his own, but I like that. I like that she's like, I'm not just gonna disappear, and he's like, unfortunately, I am. And you don't even notice how integral Jordan is to his story until he has to leave her. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I really appreciated the book as I got going,
Hmm.
but I was very pleasantly surprised. I was very happy that while it was largely rich people who value nothing and throw everything away, it
There's more
had
to it. Yeah.
so many, yeah, it had so many layers. It had so much to it, so much to take into your own life and to,
Hmm.
think about well afterwards. But we haven't actually gotten to the movies yet.
Yeah, so I think we can do that. So it's safe to say that we both like the book,
Mhm.
that it's very well written. Um, what's funny when I was listening to it with my husband, so my husband listened to the books. We listened to it together. Well, we don't usually do that. We usually like listen to different books. But he's never read it, so I was like, hey, you can listen to it with me. And like we were at the first chapter, we were like driving on a vacation, and like after the first chapter, I was like, so what do you think? He's like, oh my gosh, this guy's really good. No wonder you like this. He's a really good writer. Well, my husband's writing his own novel right now. He's doing that. He's written screenplays and he's written music and stuff like that. So he's done that, but this is his first time writing a novel. So like he's understanding and learning to appreciate more like that aspect of what I do and like all that goes into it. Because until you write a book yourself, you don't really understand how hard it is.
Hmm.
He was just like, wow, yeah, this he just the way he described everything was just so beautifully put, and it was just wow.
Yeah.
And that's like the way he describes when Nick first comes into Tom and Daisy's house and he goes into that room and all the windows are open and all the curtains are flowing and even the girls' dresses are kind of like just billowing because the wind's coming through and the windows are open because they're hot and like they show that scene in both the movies that I watched, Robert Redford one and the Leo DiCaprio one.
Hmm.
And I feel like they both captured exactly what was in the book, that sense of kind of flowing into like this whole other world.
I did not get the Robert Redford one. I got one from 1949. It has
You got a really old one?
yeah, it's got Alan Ladd
I should definitely.
as Gatsby,
Okay.
and then it has Betty Field. Betty Field is actually a lovely woman. Betty Field plays Daisy Buchanan, and she's actually a lovely woman, and sometimes I think that she's quite beautiful. She was maybe the least lovely woman in this film.
Oh, okay.
I was like, this is unfortunate. I don't know what's going on. All of I don't know. Like when I saw her, I was like, no, no, no.
That can be Daisy.
Nobody risks his life for 5 years or 8 years or whatever for that lady. But
Okay.
whatever.
Okay.
But it was awful.
Okay.
It was awful and I hated it. I understand there are some aspects of it that you just can't change. Like the scene when Myrtle gets hit,
Mm-hmm.
like they did the thing where like on the screen you see her going, um what, Tom, like out in the street, and then you see the car driving, and it's so funny because you can see the edit of like the car comes driving and she goes like like, do you know what I mean? Like suddenly like it reminds me of the old black and white Twilight zones, how
Yeah.
like it would have been the exact same effect if they wanted her to shrink, like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Like she just goes and they make car crash sounds as the car drives by and her image just gets smaller and goes off screen,
Oh
and
yeah.
then she's like in the air going, oh, like it was
Yeah.
so bad. And I understand that that's just editing. That's the time that it was
Yeah. That's
1949. They could
filmmaking.
only do what they could do. I get that, but also they changed, like, same basic story. All the same things still happened. Myrtle gets hit, Tom's cheating, blah blah blah. But they changed all of the kind of the meanings. Like nothing had meaning anymore. And
Hmm.
they did a lot of telling you instead of showing you.
Huh.
Do you know what I mean? Like they had a tendency to, instead of showing, when he shows her the house, so he has the tea party at Nick's house, and then he shows them his house, he's showing them all this stuff. And like in the book, he's like, oh, he brought over all of these flowers and all these, what, and there was like a flower setting on the table. And you're like, oh, I got the impression that he like made it this big grandiose thing
Mm-hmm.
out of a little tea party at Nick's house.
Gatsby's all just fight her for tea, and I'll just happen by. And next thing you know,
Yeah.
he's cutting his lawn. He brings an entire like floral shop into his place. He brought his own tea service and everything, and like his own cakes. And
Yeah.
like next,
And
like
like I
okay,
don't know. Well, and plus they had Nick and Jordan stay together in the end. In the end, they stayed
oh,
together. And the start of the movie is the two of them going to Gadsby's grave.
oh,
And like I don't know, I just didn't like it. They like they had a whole thing about is it Cody? Is that the name of the yacht?
yeah, the rich guy with the yacht.
Yeah, so they had a whole long series of scenes about Gatsby's time on the yacht that we don't really even know. Like we don't get a lot of that information from the book, but they just made their own little like vignette of him on this yacht and all these experiences that he has on the yacht.
Mm-hmm.
And then they condensed all of the meetings and the parties and whatever down to one party, wherein all of the things are said. You know what I mean? So it was just, it cheapened everything. It cheapened all of the meanings that we glean out of the book, like all of the points that the story made. It
Mm-hmm.
cheapened all of them.
Yeah,
And I was so sad. So when I watched the DiCaprio one, I was so relieved. I feel like they did it right.
yeah. Okay, since you didn't watch the Redford one, I will talk a little
Mhm,
summary about Redford one. So, okay, I grew up with this one. One, I'm a fan of Robert Redford. I think he's a beautiful man. I think he's a great actor.
mhm,
Big fan. The Robert Redford one has Mia Farrow as Daisy.
mhm.
And again, I felt like Mia Farrow was perfect. She played the innocent yet, damaged damsel that you want to save so well. But at the same time, there's so much more going on. And I don't know, she felt like Daisy to me. And like I grew up with that movie. So when Baz Luhrmann's version came out, with Leo DiCaprio, I was like, ah. First
Mhm.
off, I think Leo DiCaprio's a great actor, but I don't think he's a super handsome man. He's not a bad looking guy, but he's not like not Robert Redford handsome. Robert Redford was a very handsome man. Like a young Brad Pitt would have made sense to me. That would have made, but Leo DiCaprio's the right age now, whatever, when they made it.
Right.
But like he's not a handsome man, but he's just not. I never got the whole Leonardo DiCaprio freak out that people did when I was a teenager around the whole Titanic thing. I never thought he was that cute. I was like, he was scrawny back then too.
I
And so,
feel like if he was just the boy next door, I could see having a crush on him.
yeah,
Also, Hollywood celebrity, I feel like there needs to be a whole nother caliber that I never really thought he made, but I'm no Hollywood celebrity either, so who knows?
yeah, I don't know. He's a great actor. I think he's a fabulous actor, and like, I think I've rarely ever seen him do anything bad. So he played the part well.
Yes.
He did play him very like confined and really like reserved. So
Hmm.
like at the end when he has his big blow up, it's like a big blow up, and it's quite traumatic. So I do appreciate what he did. He did a good job. But for
Hmm.
me, it was like, I could understand Daisy and um in the Robert Redford one, I understand Daisy and Gatsby's like and James's obsession with each other because one, they're very attractive people. They seem to like at their heart be very similar. They're
Hmm.
both very sweet people, in bad situations who just want to love somebody. They just want to have something that's theirs. And like I got that connection in the Robert Redford movie. I felt like they did a great job at the chemistry between the two of them. Yes, there's things about it because it's made in crap, the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. I'll have to look up the date, but I'll put it at the bottom here. So it's an older movie in that it's not as old as, 1949, but like it definitely dated. There's some things they do that are like, why do they do that? And there's just some random things like they would like zoom into like a cup on a table, and you're like, why are we doing this all of a sudden? Doesn't have to do with anything. And then they do other things that were really cool, cinematically. So it was kind of like quality wise, like it was beautifully done as far as like I love the sets. I love the house. I love the cars. They did a good job as far as like locations and all the places that everything was. It was really well done. Um, and it wasn't bad filmmaking wise for the most part, but I definitely felt like it was kind of boring for my kids. So I try to watch both movies with them. I have two sons that are willing to be culturalized, as we call it. And so they'll watch movies with us. And they fell asleep pretty early on. Like,
None of my girls had any interest in either one.
yeah. So like they fell asleep through the Gatsby one, and like one of them woke up at the end. It's like, oh, what's going on? They're like, because at the end it's like this big crazy thing happening. It's like,
Yeah.
I gotta explain to you what happened now if you've been watching the movie. Anyways, so yeah, it's definitely a slower burn, and it's not as like exciting and like as big as the newer one, but it has its qualities, right? It's a decent movie, but I'm also very close to it. I grew up with it. That's how I see Gatsby. That's how I see Daisy.
Mhm.
That's kind of like what I'm used to. It's a nostalgic movie for me.
Yeah.
So then Baz Luhrmann's a movie. Again, we'll put the year it came out down here because we never remember these things. Yeah, your overall take on that movie.
So I liked it. Especially having had just read the movie and having just watched the awful
Yeah.
rendition, to then watch this one felt like, okay, this told the story. And like you said, like I don't find Leonardo DiCaprio especially like just it. Like he is not what I think of when I think of the epitomal handsome man.
Mhm.
However, I see how you fall in love with that Jay Gatsby. Like, do you know what I mean? I see him being the poor farmer's son
Mhm.
and doing what it takes to belong to Daisy's world. Like
Mhm.
I see it in him. Like I don't know if he's a method actor, but if he's not, then he's all the more amazing that he appeared to really take on that person. Like I think of the scene when I thought it was kind of weird in the book when he's showing Daisy the house and he's like, "Look at all these shirts. I've got these shirts and these shirts." And he's like, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, these shirts." And I was like, "This is a little bit weird." And
Mhm.
then I saw him do it and I'm like, "That's that farmer's son being like, look, I have made it. I have legitimately
Look at all these wonderful
400
things.
shirts." Like,
Yeah. And there's like a certain kind of like sweet, like innocence about being so excited about having all these beautiful shirts when you
mhm,
with like one shirt. Like there's
right,
something like, look at this. And like his joy about the whole situation. This is stuff she takes for granted. He's so
right.
excited about all these shirts. And then that makes her excited. And then like she like it's like his joy for all the things that he's earned, all the stuff that he has, makes her suddenly like, oh yeah, that is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're
When
like,
it
yeah,
seems to almost make her sad that she gave him up for money, and now here he is 8 years later,
with money
richer than Midas,
for
and
her. Yeah.
yeah, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, what have I done? I could have had this." And so she's
Yeah.
like crying into his
It's like, why are you
shirts.
crying? She's like, I've never seen such a beautiful shirt. And
Yeah.
and in a way, that's the perfect way to say that. She just, yeah,
Yeah.
you feel so bad for Daisy in that moment because you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
this guy genuinely cares about you. He genuinely got you. And that's one thing I felt like was I felt they did a good job in the Baz Luhrmann one. I felt like Carey Mulligan and Leonardo DiCaprio had a good chemistry.
Yeah.
I bought that they clicked and I could see the tenderness and like the love. So I feel like they were really good together. I
Hmm.
actually really love Tobey Maguire in this. I know Tobey Maguire doesn't always get like the best rap as a
I
great
liked.
actor. Sometimes he's great and sometimes he,
Yeah.
but I thought he was a great cast for this. I thought
He
it was
was
really
the
well.
perfect so I think he was the perfect Nick Carraway. I think any other position in this film would have not been right.
Hmm.
But he was the perfect Nick Carraway. Kind
Yeah.
of that like awkward like when I like the apartment scene when he's in the apartment with
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I've been over my head. I don't know
I
what's
gotta get
happening."
out of here. But it's so uncomfortable. It's a whole situation. Like he's being dragged into this. Tom's like, come with me and starting to make him his buddy. And it's like, from the get-go, Nick doesn't want to be part of this. Like, as soon
Yeah.
as he finds out that Tom's got somebody else, he's like instantly mortified because he's
Yeah.
like, on behalf of his cousin, he's like, this is my cousin
Yeah.
I
He's like,
grew up with. And
he's
like,
like,
you're acting like it's no big deal. You're cheating on my cousin. Like, and I'm supposed to be friends. And one of the things I love about the book is it talks about, first line talks about, my father raised me, don't judge people. You don't know their circumstances.
mhm,
And so he's like, I'm trying not to judge. The whole time he's trying not to judge all these people for all the horrible choices they're making. At the same time, he's being dragged in to make horrible choices with people. They're
right.
not really giving him a choice. They're kind of like, come here, be a part of this whole crazy thing that I'm doing. And Jay Gatsby does the same thing. It's like, hey, come here, come be a part of this clandestine affair what I have with your cousin.
Well, and he tries to bring him into the business because he's like, ah, you do stocks, huh? I mean, if you want a little work. And when Nick is like, this, this is not my speed, Jay sees that and just like,
Oh,
not a big deal,
well,
you
part
know?
of the thing that was like Jay was offering because he felt like because Nick was doing a favor for him by having the tea party and having her come there, that he needed to do something to repay him. And so
Right.
when Nick says, "Hey, it's just a favor, no big deal," like there's a moment, and you definitely see this in the Baz Luhrmann one, where like
Mhm.
you can see that Gatsby's like, "Oh, you're a nice person. I don't have to
Right.
pay you. I don't have to give you something in exchange for a nice gesture. Just a nice guy." And like
Right.
it takes a moment and goes, whoa, because apparently he hasn't met that kind of person in a long time.
Right.
And
Yeah, I love that. So another thing in the book that I feel like DiCaprio is perfect at is Nick talks about how like Gatsby had this smile. He had this way of looking at you and this smile that you're like, he understands me in a way that nobody else does. I
yeah,
know that he doesn't actually understand me, but you as the watcher, when you watch Leonardo DiCaprio give that smile, like you're almost like, oh my gosh, he does care about me. Like,
yeah, like there's a charm there. Like you're it's
yeah,
an instant connection. Like Nick's like, I like this guy.
yeah.
I don't even know why, but I like you.
By the end of the story, like in the book, they go into so much more detail after Jay dies.
Yeah.
And then his dad comes and knows
Yes.
he's coming day after day. And it's like, and it's
Hmm.
heartbreaking. And I didn't quite cry. There have been some books that I've actually cried, but I did get kind of that like,
Oh,
oh my gosh, where's the payoff? When do we see people actually show up? And no one showed up.
yeah.
And and it kind of speaks to that concept that like these are all just people who were there to get what they could get while the getting was good, right?
Yeah.
And Nick, who was not meaning to be any part of this, he's like, I really don't want in. I guess I'm in, and Gadsby had that smile that like initially that's all it was. Like he's like, I was personally invited. And yes, it turns out it was because he wanted to get to Daisy
Yeah.
through me. But he just had this endearing way that like so that scene the only scene that I recognized when I said when you're like, duh, do you know the Gatsby? And I said, all I know about Gatsby is lots of drinking. And I was thinking super wealthy and lots of drinking, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of when Gatsby is holding, I don't know if it's champagne or wine or whatever,
Yeah.
when Leonardo DiCaprio is
Yeah.
holding out
He
the
has the
glass of wine
fireworks
and he
behind
has
him.
that smile and has the fireworks going on. And that to me was Gatsby, but also that smile, like okay, yep, I can see someone falling in love with that smile. Do you know what I mean? Like if he looked me in the eye and did that, I would be like,
Oh,
"What?"
hi.
Like, you know,
Thank you.
like so I loved that by the end. Oh, that was the other thing with the 49 movie. Nick never really cared for even in the end, he never really cared for Jay all that much. He was always like, dude, I don't want to do this. This is dumb. Like he like was constantly like, you're doing wrong. What you're doing is wrong. And he was almost like just preachy and boring. Like it was weird. He was
That's
never
not
Gatsby's
the
side,
book at all. That's not who Nick was.
not at all.
Nick was trying
And
not to be that person.
right. And so then when I and so that well, and then in the end, the only reason that he was the only person at the funeral because he felt like this man was part of our life. He deserves to have people at his funeral.
Yeah.
And no one else is going to put flowers on his grave, so I will put flowers on his grave. Like it was a sense of duty. It wasn't a sense of regard. And it was so refreshing to watch uh McGuire's Nick.
Mm-hmm.
By the end, this was his blood brother. Like,
This
you know
was
what
like
I
his
mean?
best friend. Like this was the nicest person he'd ever known. Like
Yeah,
it was
he's
like
and
he
he
lost a brother. Like he lost a part of himself.
yeah, and when he's talking to his therapist or whatever, he's talking about how he's like, he is hope. He got lost in that hope. That hope ended up killing him.
Yeah.
But his hope, his concept that Daisy loves me as much as I love her, and she will leave Tom for me.
Yeah.
And, the only thing that Tom had was money. And I've got at
I have that
least
now
what
too.
Tom,
So there's nothing stopping us. Yeah. Like he
right.
had this unshakable hope that if he did all these things, he would get what he wanted.
Mhm.
And so I think it's interesting, like he says that James is hope. Well, it
Mhm.
was interesting for me. Okay, so it's two things.
Mhm.
Um, to me, I see Daisy as the epitome of hopelessness.
Mhm.
And so like Jay is hope and she's hopeless. And like so in a way they're attracted to each other because he sort of wants to save her and she wants to be saved. She
Mhm.
wants that light that he has. But at the same time, like when I don't know if he says this, but like I got the impression from the book that when Nick first sees Daisy when he comes into Tom's house and everything, I swear there was something about how Daisy had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world.
Yep.
Same thing about Jay and his smile. They both
Mhm.
have that quality, that ability to make you feel like you were really important. That when they were with you, you were the person that mattered, and you were their best friend, and they like had this enduring quality of making you feel welcomed and loved and cared about. And
Mhm.
so clearly there's a lot of similarities in these two very different people with two different, very different backgrounds. And like when you see their relationship, and I think they did a great job in this movie showing that relationship, showing why they seem to care about each other and that they really do still love each other after all this time. That they really did have something important in that 1 month, that there
Right.
really was something there. You go, you don't, it's weird because I'm totally against infidelity. I don't root for divorce. I don't root for um affairs. But like with the story, like when it comes to Gatsby and Daisy, you honestly feel like, yeah, why aren't they together? Why isn't she leaving him?
Yeah.
You know? And so that's one of the things I want to talk about that they didn't do in this movie. They didn't show the scene where Daisy daughter walks in when they're
Uh-huh.
all at Tom's house, like before they go off to the city to go hang out in the hotel and get some ice, whatever. Before the big scene where, he says she doesn't love you. Um, Daisy's daughter comes in and walks up and she introduces Gatsby to her daughter. And she's like, she wanted Gatsby to be her daughter. And she's like, oh, do you like my mommy's friends? And she's like, I want daddy. And then she walks off. And there was a moment in like the Redford version, they have that where like he looks down at her and it's something like reality sits in that this is a much more complicated situation than he realized. It's not just Daisy, there's a child involved. They have a
Right.
kid together. And like suddenly it's like, oh, it's like the possibility that this isn't going to work out is there for a second. You can see in his mind, like suddenly he's freaked out by the idea that she does have a child with this
Yeah.
man.
Does that mean that that she can never see her child again because
Or
she's
is
gonna
the
kill
child going
me.
to come with us? And
Or
how
yeah,
is that going to work in a
his
relationship? I wasn't
calm
planning on being
daughter.
a dad,
Yeah,
yeah. It's like there's a moment of like, oh crap, what am I doing here? Oh crap, how is this going to work?
yeah,
And I love that in the book. I love that in the other movie. And then I also loved having the dad finally show up, finally meeting James's dad and like all the stuff the dad shared with him. Like
yeah,
that was in the back of the book of like James's old book of like resolves and things. Like I love the insight that gives into Gatsby's background and
yeah,
who he became. I love finding out that Gatsby's been sending money to his poor parents this whole time and
yeah,
taking care of them. I'm like, I love that because it made it seem like at first, like he just ran away and like forget you guys. But no, he was still taking care of them. He was still
yeah,
being a good son. And I love that at the same time, the dad's so proud of him. He's like, my son lived in this great house. He was this great man. Like,
yeah.
yeah, he doesn't know how he got his money. And they never straight up tell us what he
Right.
does in this organization. Like, I would kind of wondered if it was more of like Jay was like the respectable, like, storefront kind of like he was
Right.
the representative for this group. Like, this is how they could mingle with all these fancy people. He looks fancy, they give him a fancy house, he gets
Yep.
all this fancy stuff, and he makes it possible for them to sell all
Yep.
this liquor and to make all these connections. And so maybe he was just like a gateway, he was just like the spokesperson or whatnot. Maybe he wasn't involved in that much of the crime,
Yeah,
but it
he
just
was
sounds
the
like he
face.
was a little bit involved because Chicago's calling and Philadelphia's calling, and
Yeah.
clearly there was something going on. But I love that they never really tell us.
Yeah. I love that too. So that was another thing that I didn't like. So there's two things I didn't like about the 49 version that I feel like I don't want to just ignore because I understand creative license. Also, irks me so bad. So, first of all, they just straight up tell you, like I said, they just keep telling you instead of showing you.
Yeah.
And they're just like, he started out as after I don't know, after his time in the army or whatever. He's like, he started this whole enterprise with rum running, and then he got involved in whatever syndicate, and
Yeah.
now he's like, and like they just tell you that he's doing this. And then when he goes to buy the house, he's like, I want something over in, is it West Egg that he wants
Mhm.
something in? And they're like, oh no, those are all old families. Those don't go up for sale. They just get inherited by the next, next of kin or whatever. You can't, like, they don't sell them over there. But East Egg, their houses are even bigger and they're more modern. And so he's like, fine, I guess I'll take it. And then one of his henchmen comes over, the piano guy, the guy that plays the piano. But
Mhm.
he
Like
comes over and he's like, look, boss, you can see Daisy's house from your dock or whatever. And I'm like, no, no, no. Like
what?
that was like a big reveal. Like the purpose behind it, that mattered. The
Meaning
green
of that
light
green light, like the
mattered.
symbolism of it.
Like the first time that you see Gatsby in the book, he's almost like he's or not almost, he's literally like reaching out
Reaching out
almost
to
like he
that
can
light.
touch that light. And you're like, that's weird. And it matters. And they
Yeah,
just
it
tell you.
matters.
Interestingly, they also tell you that this house that's like a castle, but in
Yeah.
America, like he's like that same henchman, he's like, I don't know, boss, you really want something like this? You're gonna drop 200 grand on this old place. And I'm like, I'm sorry, he just bought that mansion for $200,000.
Kitty. I mean,
Like,
that's an amazing deal nowadays.
right
You can't even
nowadays,
buy
yeah.
a normal house for that kind of money now.
I was gonna
I
say
would
my
love
house is twice that.
that
Like,
giant house. Like both movies, they had a beautiful house that they used for
yes.
Gatsby's house.
And this
And
was
I
gorgeous.
would be totally happy to live in either one of those homes. I thought they were gorgeous. Same time, I loved Nick's tiny little cottage.
I thought that was so cute. Okay, if this was a real life thing, I would prefer the 49 version. But because it was the story and people needed to be true to the characters that they were, this made me so angry. In the end, how it looks like Daisy and Tom are being like conspiratorial and then they just leave town. In this movie, in the 49 version, he decides to do the right thing and he is trying desperately to call Gadsby and the how the phone is ringing or whatever, or he's waiting for a phone call.
Yeah.
In the 49 version, the phone keeps ringing and ringing and ringing, and Gadsby can't answer it because he's already been oh, first he ignores it and then he gets shot.
Uh-huh.
but it was Tom trying to tell him that the guy's coming with a gun. And that's exactly opposite to who Tom is.
Yeah.
And it
Tom doesn't
changes the
care.
entire story. And it just made me angry.
Yeah. Well, I
So
do
anyway.
love having the Robert Redford one. They just had it like he's waiting for Daisy to call and Nick calls. But like
Mhm.
so he's waiting for that ring and then he finally hears the ring and then he gets shot. But
Right.
like in the Baz Luhrmann one, I actually liked having like the henchman answered the phone and he's all and like Nick hearing the gunshots and hearing that something happened. He's like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And like being there for that moment. I feel like they were extra dramatic with how they did it in the Baz Luhrmann one. I
Yeah.
like that moment where it's like he's standing there, he's like on the edge of the pool, Leo DiCaprio,
Mhm.
like waiting to be told by his henchman that it's Daisy. Like, and then that look of hope. He's so excited she called. And then bam. And he's
Yep.
like, that moment is like, what just happened? And then he's dead. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow.
I love that. That one yanks at you. That one you feel all of the like, oh, like,
Oh,
he died in pure hope. Like
yeah,
he had the confirmation of his hope turned to reality as far as he was aware.
yeah,
And it's almost you almost think like good that he never knew that they just skipped town. You know?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, rather he live, but still, like,
Yeah, me too. Well, I do love that like they had the whole thing where like Nick stayed with them the night before and he's like, "You just go away. Go somewhere. And do something." It's like, "I can't leave now. She needs me." You
yeah.
know, and in the Baz Luhrmann one, they showed her say, "Why don't you just run away?" It's like, "But I got all this for you. We're gonna live in this house." And this is
Mhm.
like he could just picked up and ran away with her.
Yeah,
Yeah, but then how was she probably wouldn't have done it because she had a kid. Probably
right.
wouldn't have worked out, but still it was like he was so like he built all this for her. He wasn't about to run away from it when he did all this for her.
And another thing that I really, really liked, and I'm glad that they kept I think they kept it in this one. I feel like I heard this in this one, but when they're in the hotel and because they go in to get ice or whatever, and
Mhm.
they have their whole big like breakdown fight kind of thing going on, and and he keeps saying, "Say you never loved him," and he has that like desperate like
Yeah.
you have to say that, otherwise this has all been for nothing. And she looks at him and she goes,
You
"I
asked
love
too much.
you now. Isn't that enough?"
Yeah. Like you want
My
too much.
Yeah, I say, "Why, yes, it is. Move forward." But again, that's not true to who Gatsby
Gatsby's
was.
Gatsby's mind, he was able to do all this because he had in his head that she just married him because he had money and she was tired of waiting for him. And
Hmm.
that the only thing that Tom had was money, that there was no connection, and that she was this entirely loveless for marriage, which more or less is true, and that there was no connection, and that like she just needed, and for him, he needed to hear her say to Tom, "I never loved you," and then
Hmm.
walk away. And then he would feel like it was like it never happened. Like it went away. It would
Right.
like they'd go right back to where they started and they were gonna go get married at her parents' house and it would be like nothing changed, you know? Like everything happened the way he wanted it to. But she couldn't do that. She couldn't do that because for whatever reason, there's a sense of some kind of honesty in Daisy, at least in this moment, where she's like, I can't say that I never loved him. Like when she's
Yeah.
mad at him, she's like, she can say it. But when she's not mad, she's like, I can't just say that I never loved him. I loved him. Like,
Yeah.
and then she's like, I loved you too. And he's like, you loved me too? Like
Yeah.
his brain, like, it like blows his mind when she says
Yeah.
that.
It
Gatsby's like,
is.
how can
Yeah.
you love me too?
And
Like,
I think some of that hails back to, like I said, like in the beginning, when not in the beginning, but like when they were talking about his backstory, and he had slept with women, but he never loved any of those women.
yeah,
It was always like physical, it was the moment, it was
yeah, it didn't
something
mean
to
anything.
do. He loved.
Yeah,
And yes, he took her at some point or whatever, however they say it.
yeah,
But yes, there was a physical element, but he loved her.
yeah.
And
He
she was
considered himself.
worth 8 years. Yeah, like,
Yeah,
yeah. And for him, like I see that he needed, she was the only one ever. Anyone else that he had ever been with, it was never love except for her. And he needed that to be the same from her. And then I also see from her perspective, like you can't live with someone and not have a love for them.
I
Especially,
had a child with this person.
yeah, like
Some
yeah,
relationship forms, even when they're horrible people.
yeah, when he says not even when I carried you down from the punch bowl or whatever, not in Capri or whatever he says,
Yeah.
and that's true. And like I know that this is like going deeper than anybody cares about, but there's so many different kinds of love that maybe she was not in love with Tom the way that she was so deeply committed to being in love with Jay. However, yes, she loved him.
Yeah. She came to love him. They, there was something there.
Reading it especially and seeing it um in the Lerman version, um that's what I see coming from Daisy. That's what I hear coming from her words is that she's like, I can't say I never loved him,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that I love you.
I
And
didn't love you. I loved you too.
yeah,
Like,
and
I
she
love you
doesn't have,
now. I love
she
only
doesn't
you
have,
now. So like,
yeah, like she
yeah.
doesn't have it either in her vernacular or just in the moment. Like she can't really like define the differences. And Gatsby wouldn't understand anyway because he hasn't ever had that. He hasn't ever grown close to someone and yet been in love with Daisy at the same time.
Yeah.
The
He
closest
hasn't
thing
gone
he
through what
has,
she's gone through.
yeah, the closest thing he has is Nick, and Nick is not nearly on that same level. There's such a finite, like, this is the way that I need it to be because this is the way that I feel mentality to both, to Tom and to Jay. And she's like, I'm sorry, I'm not a dude. I don't feel the way you guys feel your feelings. Like, but
Yeah.
she doesn't have the awareness to express that, even though her words and her actions do express it. Like she's like, so I'm not allowed to be in love with you because I have a love for the man who I was married to for 8 years. Like
Yeah.
you see her kind of shutting down and just being like,
Well, especially when when Tom pushes him and
mm-hmm,
like makes him lose his cool. Like,
yeah,
so that's one thing they didn't do so well in the Robert Redford one. It was kind of lackluster when they showed him. He didn't exactly break down. They just kind of looked like they were about to get in a fight, and like Daisy like ran. She was like, "I can't handle this," and ran away. So like there wasn't like the big blow up like they did in the Baz Luhrmann one. And I felt like that was so much more impactful because you
mm-hmm,
could watch her kind of be like, "Whoa, what is this?" What like he suddenly went from being that this kind of person she wanted to be with to being like just really scary
yeah,
because I don't think, although like Tom and Daisy might not have a great relationship, I don't think that Tom has ever hit Daisy really.
right,
He might have been a little rough with her, but I don't think he's ever like smacked her like he did Myrtle.
right,
And so like she hasn't dealt with that side of him at all. So and yeah, she sees that he's kind of like a forceful person and everything. But in that moment, part of what makes Jay so great is he's not like Tom.
right.
And like he's refined and he's just so hopeful and he's so wonderful. He's so
Mhm.
sweet, so kind. He's so attentive. And
Yeah,
like he cares only about her. And then in that moment, suddenly Jay seems like a different person. Like
yeah,
he's so angry and mad. And suddenly she's like, whoa,
yeah. Well, and I like that Nick's commentary in that moment is that in that moment, in that altercation or almost altercation, he realized, yeah, Jay does look like maybe he is the kind of person that killed a man. Like he's
yeah.
like,
Yeah, because
wow,
he
like
killed
he's
Gatsby
kind
just
of,
then, and like losing his cool, and like revealing that side of himself. He killed Gatsby, and he also kind of killed the relationship because that was too much for her. And like I love the line where he's saying, as Gatsby started talking really quickly, and the more he tried to say to bring her back, the further she pulled into herself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he was just digging a hole for himself at that point. It was
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah. And
but
I feel like DiCaprio was perfect at that.
yeah, he
He
did a great job.
is so good. He is so like he's so good. Like I said, he's got to be a method actor because he just was in that moment, he was losing his entire purpose in life. In
Mm,
that moment, even though he's one of the celebrities that when I see him, I just see Leonardo DiCaprio. But when he starts acting, I see, even if all I'm looking at is Leonardo DiCaprio, I am watching him lose his entire life's purpose. I
yeah,
am watching him have a psychotic break. You
yeah.
know what I mean? Like he becomes the emotion that he's projecting
Hmm.
so well that like I almost get a little apprehensive as I'm watching it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this man is, wait a minute, I don't care. I'm not Daisy. What? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I loved seeing things like that.
Yeah, and it's like in that moment he suddenly does seem like this underhanded criminal, like low life that Tom's
Hmm.
making him out to be.
Hmm.
Like suddenly he does seem like he's unsavory and like, oh, he's just a thug or whatever. Whereas before he didn't seem that way. Before he wasn't that way. But in that moment he manifested what Tom was saying. But it was because he let Tom get under his skin. He let Tom dig into him and like the whole fact that he was dirt poor and we're not the same as you. You're not the same as us. And it was like, but here's the thing. Tom hasn't earned anything in his entire life.
Right.
He doesn't deserve anything he has, including Daisy, including even Myrtle. He doesn't deserve anything. He hasn't worked for it. Meanwhile, Gatsby has busted his butt to
Hmm.
make a fortune in 5 years, enough that he can like sweep Daisy off her feet. That's not an easy thing to do. One thing to like do well for yourself and to like make something of yourself. It's another thing to reach those heights that he's at. That's like astronomical. That's going from being dirt poor to being a billionaire.
Yeah.
That's a huge leap. So it's not like he hasn't worked. He has worked. Whatever he's done, it might not have been honest, but he has busted his butt to make this possible so
Hmm.
he could have this for her. Not just for him, for her. And I think
Right.
that's the thing is that he was perfectly fine before he met Daisy. And
Hmm.
in like the Baz Luhrmann one, they showed more that he was telling to Nick. He's like, I knew that if I kissed this girl, this would be the end. I knew that if I just let myself go, I'd fall in love with her.
Hmm.
And I was like, I wouldn't be able just to keep on going and just be on my own, like be like God and just, doing my own thing. I knew it would become all about her. And it was true. Like he could have done all those things for himself, but it meant more to him that whole life because he was doing it for her,
Yeah.
because there was a purpose, there was a meaning behind it. Whereas nothing Tom has ever done has had any meaning behind it at all, has
Yeah.
mattered ever. So for Tom to be like all like oh blah blah and like oh I'm so much better than you because I inherited my money and I didn't earn it from like illegal activities. It was like you're a horrible person.
Right.
So like you don't have the right to really judge. Yeah, it's horrible that what Jay's doing, that he's a part of this criminal empire in this dangerous world. But at the same time, he's not out cheating on his wife. Yeah, he's, sleeping with your wife. But like
Right.
he's not beating women. He's not like treating
He's
his wife horribly.
he's not living for himself like Tom is.
Tom's
And I
entirely self-centered.
Yeah. And I think I think that, I mean, I'm not inside Fitzgerald's mind and
Mhm.
why he wrote things the way he wrote them, but I get the sense that Tom is cheapening because I hate it when people call inexpensive things cheap. I chose the cheap one because it was less expensive.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's true. Very often things are less expensive because they are cheap. But to me, cheap denotes poor quality.
Yeah.
Inexpensive denotes not much money. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so for Gadsby to listen to Tom just rip him up and down, Tom was cheapening not only everything that Gatsby has done, but because of that, Daisy. He was
Mhm.
cheapening Daisy because all of that was for Daisy. According to Jay Gatsby, this entire existence that he has now, that this entire thing that Tom is ripping down was for Daisy, and therefore, in ripping it down, you rip her down too.
Mhm.
And at the same time, Daisy is not willing to be as on his side as he was on her side. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, he's expecting her just to be with him and be like, okay. And like when things got hard, she wasn't able to do it. When
right.
things were hard, she had to kind of be like forced to saying, yeah, I'm leaving you. But
Yeah.
even then, she couldn't be forced into saying, I never loved him. Like
Right.
she wasn't as on board with the whole thing as him. But then, like, I think there was a lot of things that like elements of the whole thing that she never really let cross her mind, like the daughter thing. Like,
Mhm.
what's going to happen with my child if I leave him? How is this really going to end? Whereas Gatsby always had a goal in mind. He knew where this was going. Was for
Mhm.
her, she was just first just excited just to have him back in her life and to have something in her life and to be happy about something, to feel
Yeah.
like she mattered to someone because she's been feeling worthless and meaningless this whole time. And so this relationship's intoxicating. Plus, she does genuinely care about Gatsby. But I don't know that, like, in her, like, sort of self-centered mind or her, like, excited mind, that
Mhm.
she ever really planned on leaving Tom. That it
Right.
was a beautiful, wonderful idea, but the reality it would have never happened.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
like, if she had been honest about that, if she had been able to recognize that in the beginning and just told Gatsby, I will always care about you and you matter to me, but like I will never leave my husband and I can't leave my daughter.
Yeah.
And as much as I wish things were different, they can't be. Then, it would have, yeah, crushed Gatsby, but it also would have, saved his life and, you know, prevented a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But she's not that self aware. She's
Right.
despite all her great qualities, she's also very spoiled
Yeah.
and very self-centered and very much a product of her childhood and her class.
Mhm.
And she's almost as awful as Tom.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's
at
why
the
I
end,
say
she
like
is.
she's just weak. Like, do you know what I mean? And it's not entirely her fault. It's not that she's like lazy in her relationships, but she is just weak. She is the one that marries the guy that Mama says to marry.
Yeah.
She is the one that just lets him cheat over and over again. And when it becomes a scandal, you move to another city.
Yeah.
Like,
Puts up with it and lives with it. Yeah.
yeah, she is the one that sees someone that actually cares about her, and she's like, oh my. And so when she's with him and he says, leave it all behind, she says, yes. And then when her husband's like, what's wrong with you? She's like, you're right. Like
Right.
she's
Yeah.
just weak.
She doesn't know how to make up her own mind. She
Yeah.
doesn't have a backbone. And like, yeah, she's very easily distracted
Hmm.
by whatever's going on at that moment. And, yeah, she threw away love. Like she had it. And I do love that whole scene when they talk about Jordan finding Daisy on the night before her wedding with
Hmm.
like the pearls in one hand and Jay's letter in the other. And she's like, give these to whoever and tell them that Daisy's changed her mind. And like,
Hmm.
at the last minute, she was like, no, I can't do this. I love this guy. I'm gonna wait for him. And like, and then the next day she marries Tom. And it's like, because there's the reality of it.
Hmm.
No matter what Jay did, her parents probably never would have welcomed that relationship. They probably never would have approved. And that would have always been an issue. She would have had to run away with him anyways. And like, it would have, I don't know. I think essentially the relationship was always doomed. It was never going to work out unless she was willing to go and live with him as a poor girl
Hmm.
and like leave her family behind. It wasn't going to happen. And
Right.
then even when he had everything, he gave her everything she wanted, she still couldn't leave it behind because she still is married, not so much to Tom, but to her class, to her name, to her family, and
Hmm.
to that whole ideal that, there's certain things you just don't talk about or you don't do when,
Right.
yeah, when you're money.
Right.
Money can't seem vulgar, even though they're very vulgar. Even though they're doing horrible things behind closed doors, they can't openly be like, "I'm leaving my husband because he hit me,
Right.
a horrible guy." No, so she's more married to the idea of who she is and what she was raised with than she is to this person who actually loves her.
Yeah.
It's not even so much about Tom as it is what Tom represents. It's
Yeah.
she cares about Tom, but like Tom represents the safety of what she's used to and what she knows
Yep.
and what she understands. With Gatsby, it's all scary, it's all new, and it's risky and unpredictable.
Yeah.
And then she has to make an actual choice. She has to make a sacrifice if she with Jay. Where if
Right.
Tom should have to sacrifice anything other than happiness and love.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the thing is pick your selfishness. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like she's torn between selfishness this way or selfishness this way.
yeah,
And she chooses the monster she knows. Like, you
yeah.
know, there is no real good outcome.
In this, no, yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is in the Redford one, they had a moment where like um Jordan, they have that whole thing with Jordan and Nick where they kind of break up, but they have it in like the lounge of a hotel. And Jordan's like, oh, well, Tom and Daisy are right here. They're leaving town right now. And so, like, they come down into the lobby, and Nick confronts Tom, like, a step away from Daisy. It's like, what did you tell him? What did you tell him? Because he figures out that Wilson had gone to
Hmm.
Tom and that Tom must have been the one to tell him that Gatsby had kills Myrtle. And he's like, what did you say to him? He's like, I told the truth. He just ran her down. And in that version, it's like clearly she never told him that she was the one driving the car. She let him believe that it was Gatsby. She let
Hmm.
Gatsby take the fall for her. She let, the whole thing because she's spineless. And
Right.
like in that version, Nick couldn't bring himself to tell him. It was Daisy. It was Daisy. Daisy kills Myrtle.
Yeah.
Like,
And
and
at that point, what good would it do?
he went back to the apartment and he's like, I had my pain too. I had to go back and I saw that box of dog biscuits and I fell down and I bawled like a baby.
Hmm. Yeah, like you said, Gatsby was kind of the human embodiment of hope. Daisy is the human embodiment of hopelessness.
Yes.
And um
Tom is
Nick
selfishness.
Nick is the human embodiment of logic, honestly.
Yeah.
Like in the moment, he always does tend to make the logical decision, except sometimes, especially after Gatsby's death, sometimes he makes the emotional decision. But every time it's like he talks about how he because he doesn't pass judgment on people easily, or he's not willing to hold people to that judgment that he might make, it causes people to trust him and he ends up responsible for other people's secrets.
Yeah.
And so very often he's responsible for your secrets, but he also takes responsibility for them and he doesn't divulge them. That's why he doesn't tell Tom what's going on with his wife and Gadsby. And that's why he,
Doesn't tell
doesn't
Daisy that
tell
he met Myrtle or any of that. And he doesn't
right.
tell on Daisy at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Like because that is true to his character that he is just logic and there is kind of that sense of like at this point what good would it do to be
Yeah.
like no it was you, like how would that be of any benefit to anyone at this point? And that's
Yeah.
always kind of how Nick looks at it. He will divulge what he needs to save a life if he knows that that's what's happening. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
like he's not spineless. He's not weaselly.
He's a decent person.
Yeah,
But he's
but
also put in indecent situations where like people are making it difficult for him to do the right thing because they're including him in their sins and in their mistakes and their lives. And he's
yeah,
like, just kind of leave me out of it. But at the same time, he's a nice guy and he
yeah,
generally wants to help people. So he just
yeah,
gets sucked in. And I can
yep,
relate to that too. I can relate to that side of that wanting to be somebody that helps people, but then you get sucked into their lives, and
Mhm.
that could be for better or worse. You're suddenly in their lives, and then you have to be a part of the problems or their solutions, and that's dangerous either way. Okay, so to sum up, 1949 version, not so good.
No.
Robert Redford one's pretty good. I'm a fan of it, but I can see where some people might not like it because it's a little old and dated and a little slow. Um, Baz Luhrmann one is very good. The one like criticism I might have of this movie, of Baz Luhrmann's version of it, is that when it first starts, it feels too much like it's trying to be Moulin Rouge with all this
Yeah.
jumping.
Yep.
Like I get that in the moment they do a lot of that. It's like when they're all partying and going crazy at Myrtle's apartment. And so
Hmm.
like when I first saw it, I was like, it feels like he's just doing the whole and plus he started it out with like Nick's writing it.
Uh-huh.
Again, it felt like Moulin Rouge because you had the main characters writing the book and you saw the words up on the screen and I was like, it was a little like he's just rehashing the same thing. But then like
Hmm.
after that I kind of just got into it and I didn't worry about it. But like that's my one criticism. There's it almost made it feel like he could only do one thing. He could
Yeah.
only do one kind of story.
Yeah.
And so that was my only criticism, but it's
I
not that
was
big a deal.
I was gonna say it was a funny juxtaposition to watch like 1949's version of a wild 20s party as opposed to, yeah, the Moulin Rouge of it all in the Baz Luhrmann one.
Yeah, modern.
Um, like they still had like the jazz singer and she's doobadoo wopping as they're like milling around with drinks in their hand, but it
Hmm.
was so much more mild and so much more tame. And I don't know which one is truer to reality because people
Yeah.
do talk about how they were just wild and crazy and
Mm.
on all kinds of things, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a little more Moulin Rouge-y,
Yeah.
and they were just afraid to show it in the 40s. But
Yeah. Where they weren't as creative in their storytelling, but yeah.
yeah.
Overall, like when I watched it again with my sons, that part didn't bother me so much. Just the first time I watched it, I was kind of Moulin Rouge copy, but then
Yeah.
the second time I'm like, no, it works for the moment. Like it's the choices he makes works overall. So
Mhm.
I just wish that they had the part with the daughter and that we saw the dad because you've got a lot. It kind of sort of wraps the story up and sort of gives Nick kind of some kind of glimmer of hope or some kind of closure when he
Right.
meets the dad.
Yeah.
And then the dad's like, "Are we his friends?" Like, yes, we were really good friends. And like
Mhm.
he gets to feel like there's somebody there besides him at like the funeral and that I should think in the book the dad comes after the funeral, but in the Redford version, the dad came just in time for the funeral. And anyways, it was kind of like closure for Nick, and it gave
Yeah.
him a sense that something came out of this and that it wasn't
Yeah.
all for naught. But in Baz Luhrmann's, the whole thing is he wrote a book about it.
Right.
He wrote it out, he put it all, and like at first I didn't like the first time I saw it, I didn't like the whole like psychiatrist thing and having him tell the story like he's writing the book. But
Hmm.
then seeing it again, I was like, it works. It works. You know?
It worked for me because when he went to Yale, his whole thing was that he was going to become a writer.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then he went into stocks and bonds and whatever else. And
Yeah.
so now having the therapist say, you wanted to be a writer, write this.
It just helps you get this out and it helps you deal with it, you
Hmm.
know. And I like that. And I like that when they showed him at the end, like he put the title page on it, and then he comes back and writes the Great
Yeah.
Gatsby. I was
Hmm.
like, yeah, it felt
Yep.
like it was a good representation of the book overall.
Yep. I agree.
So there you go.
Weird
That's the Great
side note,
Gatsby.
there's also a Japanese version of this. I have not seen it yet, but I did download it.
Oh,
So,
I might have to go and watch some more versions. I know there's like another version, like a made for TV version with
mhm.
like
I
Mira Sorvoni as
yeah.
Daisy. I
Yeah.
forget the guy.
I found seven.
You found
Um, I found 7 versions. One of them is Japanese. I haven't watched it yet, but I do have it. I only was able to obtain the two
Hmm.
in the time that I have had. So,
Yeah. Okay.
but yeah.
I own
So
the two that I watched.
yeah,
So I might have to go find the Japanese one. I might go watch the 1949 one and the other one just to for
just
the
to
sake
see.
of seeing how all these different people did the same
Yeah.
story. Because it is interesting watching
Yeah.
different interpretations of the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's
I love a story that can grab enough attention that everybody wants to tell it their way.
yeah,
Everybody wants you to feel what they felt by showing. So
exactly. Yeah.
well done, Fitzgerald.
Well done. Well done. Yeah. Okay. So that was my book. What book are we doing next time, Ray?
I'm diving back into Roald Dahl because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't know. I just love his stuff. But I had told you I was like, ooh, now I want to do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory because you made some comment about
Yeah. How I don't like Timothy
Chalamet, however you say
Chalamet.
his name.
I want to say his name in weird ways every time I hear it.
Timothy Chalamet. Anyway,
Well,
but I really do, I actually really do like Charlie. So I want to do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
okay, so that's super funny because over on my husband's podcast, over in Nostalgia Cast Land, they just did um Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory
Did they?
movie. Yeah. So they just did that. So I'm and like we watched this whole thing about Gene Wilder's like biography, whatever about him before we watched that. And then Johnny's like, "What Gene Wilder movies haven't you seen?" Because he loves Gene Wilder. I was like, "Oh, I haven't seen this, this, and this." He's like, "Oh, we're gonna watch them." So we went and watched all the ones that we could find for free. And so like I'm kind of prepared more for this. I've never read this book. Yeah.
So yeah, when we did, was it Matilda that we did?
Yeah. Hmm.
And I went real deep into Roald Dahl and I was doing all this research and stuff. So I'm probably not going to do that again for this one.
Okay.
But I just, of all of his books, this one was always the story that I like. Of all the Roald Dahl stories,
Hmm.
this was like my story. And so it's
Okay.
simple. And I know that I often choose like the children's books or the whatever, but they usually, to me, I feel like they have something to teach you that sometimes the adult books
Don't.
just don't. Yeah, they
Yeah.
just,
Well, what I think is interesting about Roald Dahl books is, yeah, they're technically kid books, but there are a lot of deeper things you can pull out of his
Mhm.
books. And there's something like rather literary about these crazy books of his.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And like,
So,
so after, I don't know if people want to go and watch the Nostalgia Cast episode that just came out, but it might be a good idea. Go watch that, and then we'll go read the book and we'll talk about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate
yep.
Factory.
And I
And
fully intend to do all three. I'm gonna do the Gene Wilder. I'm gonna do the Johnny Depp, even though that might be my least favorite of them. But
yeah,
I'll rewatch it and I'll see what I think. And then I'm gonna do Wonka.
okay.
So, and I love Nostalgia Cast. I'm sad that I didn't know that. I was keeping up with them for so long, and then
Life
summer,
happens. It's
yeah.
okay. Yeah.
But
So yeah, maybe everybody go watch the Cast. Yeah, that's kind of me plugging my husband slash my own editing work because I
and our sometimes guest, we've
yeah,
guested there, they guest here.
yeah, just sort of like our buddies. I'm literally married to one of them, but yeah, go watch that one, the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory Nostalgia Cast, and
Mhm.
then we will talk about it, and it'll be an extra layer of interesting because they had a guest on their version who had a whole nother take on the movie and
Oh,
what the Charlie Chocolate Factory story means. So very interesting. So
okay.
yeah. Okay. So for Paperback Flicks, I was gonna say Nostalgia Cast. No, Paperback Flicks. That's our podcast. Um, this was The Great Gatsby. We'll see you guys next time when we do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I'm Ruth Paddock,
I'm Rae Davidson.
and we'll see you guys later.